welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about The Fury, a Brian DePalma film from the late 70s that he made after Carrie. And this was DePalma's first big studio film. Carrie was made by MGM, but it was a limited budget. DePalma had started out as an independent director in New York and made comedies like Greetings and Hi Mom. And then he moved on. He'd been brought to the studios to make a comedy, which was a disaster, Get to Know Your Rabbit. Then went back to New York and made Sisters, which was a thriller horror movie. Then he did a horror comedy, Phantom of Paradise, and he started to establish the Brian De Palma that would become famous. He moved on and did Obsession and Carrie. All these films are all kind of fairly low budget. I mean, even the bigger budget films like Phantom of Paradise were still independently backed films. They were bigger than something like Sisters, but they weren't big films in any possible way. The Fury was De Palma's first decently sized budget film, where he probably wasn't getting a lot of slack from the studio to cut budgets all the time. Because I mean, Carrie had always problems with budgets and had to try and make do with a smaller budget than it should have had because of studio interference, and the somehow figured a way to do it. So this is the first time he actually had a decent sized budget. But it was kind of the more impersonal film because some of the Phantom of Paradise and Carrie felt like films he wanted to make, and he would go on to do Blowout and Dress to Kill first actually, and Body Double, things like that, and Scarface, which were bigger budget films, but they had studio backing. Like Scarface was a studio film, Body Double was a studio film, Dress to Kill and Blowout were independent films released by studios, but they were actually decent sized budgets because they had names in like Michael Caine and John Travolta, and they had big releases. Dress to Kill was a big hit, Blowout was a failure, but they had releases and they were serious films by De Palma. There was real De Palma films. Fury's is that kind of middle ground one where it's viewed as the De Palma film where it made in between these two periods where he learned how to deal with studio politics and a bigger budget, but wasn't quite a De Palma film. It was a bit messier than some of the other films he was making. It was him trying to figure out how to survive in a studio, where in the future he'd have learned to do that with stuff like Scarface, The Untouchables, Mission Impossible. But in this case, it was a bit more cluttered and, a bit sillier. And it has a supernatural element, sort of like Carrie. So it's sort of like Carrie with a spy movie linked to it. What this doesn't tell you is the fact it's still a very good film. It's still very enjoyable. But it is a film that, if you see it in the small screen, it does look a bit ridiculous because it's made to see projected. I watched it projected. I've seen it before on the small screen, and it feels a lot more cluttered in small screen. It feels a lot smaller, and you don't get the effects that De Palma was going for in the small screen. It's just stuff's lost. The mood's lost. The build's lost. There's certain sequences that when you see it projected on a bigger screen work, but if you see it on a small screen, seem a bit dinky and weird, just because of the screen size is important in this film. Because it is a film with a silly premise, a potentially silly premise, done before some of the effects were probably ready for that kind of film, and done at a certain budget level. So a lot of it had to be done using music, using subtle effects, using camera tricks to get the point across rather than having the CGI get later years. They had to really use carefully placed film elements here. And that's where the film really, you have most of the joy. Because the first thing is that De Palma has hired a lot of good actors here and given them space. And it's almost like everyone knows, we're in a film that could be really silly. So let's try and take it seriously to a degree, but also have some humour. So, I mean, John Cassavetes is the villain, and he was notoriously contemptuous of this film when he was making it. And he's the best thing in the film. Because he plays the villain straight, but he also gives him enough nuance that he's interesting. Kirk Douglas is terrific. He plays the father of a young man who's kidnapped. They try and kill Kirk Douglas in Israel. It appears to his son he's been kidnapped, and it appears to his son he's been killed, but he hasn't. And in most of the film is him trying to find where his son is and trying to save his son from the influences of John Cassavetes, because his son has these powers that the government want to use for their own nefarious reasons. Which is the weakest part of the film in a sense, is like, it's this linchpin of the film is the government wants this. And it's always kind of vague of what they want him for. Just he's a power, they want that power. But what the film actually does smartly is the film's about Kirk Douglas trying to get his son back and trying to avoid Cassavetes' goons. That's what the film's about, as well as finding out the another young teenage girl who's also getting her powers, and she's going to try and figure this out. It's played by Amy Irving, who was in Carrie. This time she gets to go with the powers rather than being a girl who doesn't have the powers. And she's trying to work it out, and she's sensitive to all the problems, what's happening with the son, because her and him have a psychic link. And she's also trying to work out what her powers are, and she's getting freaked out by the whole thing. And it's about these 2 points of view. It's the point of view of the father trying to find his son, and her trying to work out her powers. And they're linked with this one place called Paragon, this school for people who have these kind of powers, trying to investigate it. Of course, it's run by the government, who are trying to find the best people to exploit. And there's lots of conspiracy stuff. And this could be really embarrassing if done wrong. But DePalma is smart enough, as he hires people like Charles Durning, Carrie Snodgrass, like good actors who can do a little bits of business with before and after scenes that make the characters more human, even if the characters are doing dodgy stuff. He has little things with Amy Irving playing with these other characters who are a bit bitchy to her, and they have kind of reactions that feel much more like real life than, you know, just like a soap opera. Even though there's soap opera elements to it, it's played as melodrama, and it's a melodrama of a heightened reality and a heightened sensibility of the person experiencing it. So it's all coming through Amy Irving's character and how she feels with these certain interpersonal relationships. So everything's a bit heightened. So the camera movement's a bit heightened. Her way of seeing things is a bit heightened because she's starting to feel herself psychically linked to certain things and find herself in situations where she sees the past in a way that was very similar to what Cronenberg did in Dead Zone, where she holds onto a hand and suddenly she finds herself in an environment, she's looking around and she's seeing things go on. She can't interact with them, but she's seeing things go on and she's getting freaked out by them. So there's that kind of thing that DePalma does really well, is like, what's the sensibility of the person, what are they feeling, what are they holding on to. And you Kirk Douglas also is this like maniac trying to find his son, who's Kirk Douglas at his most Kirk Douglasly intense. But he's also got a sense of humour. He interacts early on with this family, this old woman who's dealing with her unappreciative son-in-law and daughter. And there's stuff like that that's fun because they've Dennis Franz in in one of his early roles as he's a young cop. You've got all these people who can do just little bits of business that make everything go down well, and then DePalma can throw in the set pieces that make it all kind of work. So there's lots of enjoyable things. There's some set pieces later on. The film gets bigger as it goes. And the last third is probably the weakest for me, is the sense of they make one mistake early. They make a mistake early in the third act that kind of pulls you out of it a little bit, and I don't think you ever really back into the film. Where basically the kind of emotion of the film is basically Kirk Douglas trying to find his son and the Amy Irving character, and they're coming together. Stories are coming together. He's going to get her out of this institute, and she wants to escape because she knows that something's up. Well, in this story, everything's building towards something here, and then DePalma cuts away. I think this probably was a script thing, might not have been him. To suddenly see the sun, and you've been getting hints of what's going on with the sun, but you don't really know. And suddenly they just tell you the sun's going mad, which just pulls out all the emotion of Kirk Douglas's character, because you know he's going to be doomed. And it basically means when you get to the sun character at this point, you know we're going to a tragedy. So it kind of just muddies the water, because you should have had the scene of the rescue before you got to the darker elements of the third act. And basically what happens is it dislocates you from the drama in a bad way, because you suddenly know that the drama is going somewhere dark, but also it means is the build towards that darkness happens too early in the narrative, so you have that build. Then you have another scene where Curdles is helping him have an escape and things go wrong, and then you go back to that thread, and the build that should have been from the scene where he's gone mad and building towards a conclusion is interrupted by the other thread that should have been sorted before you got to that thread. So there's a clutter with the storytelling that you're given information before you really need it, because you're really into this other story and you want to get to the end of that storyline, and suddenly it's pulled away from you, and you have to think this other thing which you're not emotionally engaged in yet. It's information you want to know, but you want to know the right time, and you know the right time is after Amy Irvin's character was saved. And putting that in there before that, the saving sequence suddenly just messes with the film's sense of pacing and your sense of allegiances in the story. So you're with these two characters, and suddenly you're forced this other character that you don't really care that much about yet. He's a shadow character, and suddenly his development's been dislocated, because you get a bit of him, then he disappears from a while, then you go back to him, and so he's dislocating your emotional involvement in the two main characters, and then they're dislocating your involvement with him, so you never really get a sense of him. And it's a real problem, because you see him early on and he's a nice kid, competitive, he's a nice kid, and then when you get to him later, you see that something's gone wrong with him, something's gone really badly wrong with him, and he's being manipulated, he knows he's being manipulated, and he knows he's just got paranoid, and he's gone insane. And that needed to come late. That needed to be built and built and built until suddenly, finally, you can't ignore it. Instead, you get this bit that's just wrong. It just feels like you're told information in the wrong order. It's a joke that has been told right, and you suddenly you're not in with the storyline you're into, and you're suddenly into another storyline, and it's just cluttered and weird. And so yeah, you need to just switch these two sequences around quite easily, and you'd have had a lot better effect. And just maybe reshoot a couple of things just to clarify the plot, which you don't really get. So it's one of those things. It's a real problem. And then in those are the sequences you have the biggest special effects bits in as well with the sun, because he's the more powerful and he can do more stuff with his things. But it means because of the dislocation with the way the story's been told, because the story has been told from two particular points of view throughout, and you've been acclimatized to those 2 points of view as your main points of view, and other characters are either connected to one character, connected to both characters, and they're connected, and that's really where your focus has been. So when it goes off, it really means you're not quite sure you're meant to be grabbing onto. And when you get to special effects suddenly, with these scenes that are now filming out of order, it just feels like empty special effects seems to be around something that's horrific. Because it's well shot, it's just in the wrong place. It's just a real problem. And when you get to the end, you're meant to have sympathy with the son because you saw he was a nice kid to start with. I mean, you're meant to be horrified by what's happened to him, but because his story's been so cut up, he's just a figure now. He's not, and the whole motivation of the film is to get him back, and the horror's meant to be, no, he's too far gone. But the way it's been told means you're not really got the ability to actually connect with that. So the last sequence where Kirk Douglas and his son will both die should be a tragedy, and it does. And if it had been built up properly, it would have been. But that one mistake just brutalizes it. So that's the big problem. Is it made one big mistake, and I don't know whose fault it was. I don't know whose decision it was. But there's a lot more DePalma in this than you expect. But you can also see why DePalma has said it was not one of his best films, because there was a lot of good stuff there, but there was how it came together. There were some mistakes made. And there was mistakes it wouldn't happen in some of his later big films that where he would actually have much more narrative control. Like, I think he worked out in this one how to do like more mainstream like thriller elements that weren't horror. Like, he figured out from his mistakes where he'd gone wrong to, so when he went to studios again he could actually figure it out a lot easier. So there was that issue that was caused the problem, but it's still a very enjoyable film. The performances are overwrought, but in the perfect way for the film. You have a great ending where John Cassavetes is blown to bits. This came before Scanners. This is before Cronenberg, because this came out 2 years before Cronenberg, with Scanners' exploding head. This is a full exploding body. But it's not as effective as exploding head. It's much more of a carnival ride of seeing Cassavetes explode, because he's such a dick through the whole film. So it's quite enjoyable to see. It's not disturbing the way the exploding head was in Scanners. Even though I think the Fury is more successful than Scanners. I mean, Scanners and the Fury do that same thing with the thrillers, but with this sort of psychic element, and there's elements of paternal issues and things like that. There's a lot of like similarities. In a sense, it's like Scanners has much more ideas in it, but they're spiraling all over the place. The Fury's better directed. The Fury, because Scanners was getting written as it was made, and Cronenberg more or less said it was a nightmare, and he had lots of problems. Well, The Fury is a well-planned film. It has its problems, but it's professionally directed, professionally acted. It's better done, but it doesn't have the same source material, you know. But it's better lead characters. But it doesn't have and it has a good villain. So it's almost like if you combine these two films, you put one good film, but instead it's two very flawed films. But I'd still have to watch both of them quite easily. So The Fury's definitely one worth watching, but if you have a chance to see it in a bigger, like projecting it, that's the way to see it. It's a lot better that way, because you get to see a lot more of the atmosphere and how the shots interact and what the shots are meant to be doing, rather than in the small screen. I think a lot of the shots look a bit cheesier than they should, because if you don't go get the music interacting with the imagery as well as it should, because it's just one of those things. It's a film that requires a big screen. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I get you to go see the film. Despite its flaws, it's still a fascinating film. So enjoy.